Wake up! It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 161. Sleep on television. The dreams dream on the small screen. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist, sleep specialist, and your host for this episode of the podcast. If you're new to the Sleep Unplugged podcast family, welcome. If you're a veteran, welcome back. We're glad you're here. We're glad all of you are here because I just happened to look at the top medical podcasts right now. And it's like Peter Attia, The Drive, and People's Pharmacy, like those two. And I recognize them. I don't listen to a lot of health podcasts, but we were number 13. And that's incredible. And I put a little post on my Instagram, it's Dr. Chris Winter, that we have not spent a penny on advertising our podcast. We don't have guests, which is probably a real hindrance to the success of a podcast. And yet here we are, the 13th ranked podcast, medical podcast. And I just wanted to thank you all for listening, spreading the word, letting people know about it. We really pride ourselves on being an excellent source of information about all things sleep. And we're going to celebrate that by doing a completely frivolous podcast about sleep's representation on television shows. So I listen to the Daily. I'm a big subscriber and follower of the Daily podcast. I do it when I walk my dogs. I've talked about it before. I get really upset when I get the dogs all harnessed up, ready to go on the walk, and they're like, it's Michael Bavaro. Hello, listeners. Today we're doing a special episode of The Daily entitled Modern Love. Listen, I've got nothing against Modern Love. Modern Love is one of my favorite David Bowie songs. But when I walk the dogs, I want to hear about some sort of story in the news in depth, not necessarily relationship advice. So I'm saying that to apologize to all hardcore listeners of the Sleep Unplugged podcast who are tuning in to listen to hardcore information about sleep. This episode might take us in a little bit of a different direction, but it's something I've wanted to do for a while. One of the listeners wrote in and said, "Hey, Chris," her name's Camille. She's an amazing artist, by the way. And she said, "Hey, did you ever see that Star Trek episode about sleep?" And ever since she sent me that text, I thought this would be a great podcast episode. So here it is, and we're going to have a good time with it. Before we get going, again, if you want to get in touch with the show, it's Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, X, Bluesky, Thread. It's RDRCHRISWINTER. We have a Spotify music playlist where we put all the music references on each of our podcasts. Today will be no different. And we have a YouTube page where we post video content of all of our shows. We are on the Spotify music playlist volume 4. So there are 4 Spotify music playlists on Spotify. If you're having any trouble finding them, let me know. Where each episode of the show, we talk about one musical group in the title of the show. And this one's special because I've managed to fit 2 in there. So before I get to it, we'll do comments, corrections, criticism. See if you can guess what the 2 musical references are in this week's title. My guess is if you found it, you're my age and you were a pretty big fan of the groups at CBGB's. Anyway, comments, correction, criticism. This comes from a listener who says, "I've listened to just about every sleep doctor, coach, etc. Just for fun at this point. You have really helped. Your explanation in what insomnia is, the 5 Ps, and you saying you sleep just not the way you want to has been a game changer to me. The 8-hour car ride example and so much more. Thank you, doctor." Well, thank you. I love how we go from the 3 Ps to the episode we did on insomnia, the 9 Ps. This listener has self-selected his favorite 5 Ps. Whatever Ps get you through the night, buddy, we are here to support them. So thank you very much for that. Our musical reference this week is the amazing group Television. They were a fleeting star on the music scene in the early to mid 70s. This is Tom Verlaine, Richard Lloyd, Richard Hell, who was with them from their beginning. Television formed in 1973 and were in massive influence in that New York proto-punk scene. Listen, if you're a big fan of the Strokes, you need to listen to Television because without Television, there are no Strokes. Hugely influential, Joy Division, REM, even John Frusciante of the Red Hot Chili Peppers was a huge fan of Television. So they formed in 73, went through some different lineups. Richard Hell, who I mentioned before, was originally their bassist. They got rid of him and did not record their first album, which was Marquee Moon, until 1977. Brian Eno, who we've talked about with Roxy Music, David Bowie producer, did some solo work on his own, actually produced early versions of the Television demo, but Tom Verlaine, who is notoriously mercurial and cagey, didn't like the sound, didn't feel like it captured his sound. And if you're familiar with Brian Eno, you know he has a very particular sound. So they finally got around in 1977 recording Marquee Moon, and it's really widely regarded as one of the prototype albums of that time period, that New York punk movement, and it's just a joy to listen to. And it's really held up over the years. This came out in their album came out in 77. I think 78, Adventure, I think was their second album, and that pretty much broke up the band. In fact, one of my favorite quotations from Tom Verlaine, who kind of ran Television, was that he struggled throughout his career to not have a professional career. And that really resonated with me thinking about the podcast that we're number 13. I get constantly asked, we can improve your visibility. We can do this for you. Can we do that for you? And I just don't want any of it. And I feel like at some point in the future, somebody's going to say, yeah, Chris, he was this kind of interesting sleep doctor, but his entire career, he worked very hard not to have a professional career, at least with podcasting. This project is for you and it's not for anybody else. So I love having a little private sleep CBGB. So the title, The Dreams Dream on the Small Screen. So sleep on television. Television is the musical reference. And we made a rule on the podcast that if the group's name is in the title, I get to pick the song that goes on the podcast. And but the dreams dream on the small screen is a song from their second album, Adventure. So we'll put the Dreams Dream. That's the name of the Dreams Dream is the name of the title I added on the small screen. The Dreams Dream we'll put on there, and we're also going to put on there Prove It. I love the song, the title track Marquee Moon, but it is way too long for the Spotify Music playlist of Volume 4. So we'll put on there Prove It, which is an awesome single off of Marquee Moon and the Dreams Dream. And that will give us our CBGB television fix for the day. David Bowie actually saw them play at CBGB's in 1974 and said, this is the most original band that he's ever seen playing in that scene. So anyway, moving on. So we talk about sleep a lot. And when somebody asks me, oh, tell me about your podcast, what do you talk about? I always say problems with prostitution in Southeast Asia. And people always give me this look like, what? I'm like, I talk about sleep. What do you think I talk about? My God, like, yes, I talk about sleep. So every week we talk about something related to the topic of sleep. And this week is no different. We are definitely going to talk about sleep, but we're going to flip on the tube, grab some popcorn, or in my case, chips. I'm a huge chips fan. I love the late July, uh, the late July tortilla chips in the green bag. I think it's jalapeno lime. Oh my God. So good. Just absolutely outstanding. And those Trader Joe's Mexican street corn, I like those a lot too. And we're going to jump on the topic of how does sleep show up in the television shows that we love, and often pretty creatively and pretty dramatically. So I was thinking about it. I've mentioned a couple episodes on this show from time to time. I'm a big consumer of pop culture. I love it. I am crestfallen to hear that Stephen Colbert will be going off the air. I can't believe that. So I just like good, intelligent television. And I'm really excited to talk about some shows that I'm familiar with that portrayed sleep in an interesting way. So I'm really interested in your thoughts about this. Maybe we make this a yearly thing, or maybe the next time we do it, at some point in the distant future. We talk about sleep portrayals in movies or something like that. We're kind of doing sleep portrayals in songs with our, title track of each episode. So the movie thing I think is really cool. So if I've missed one, let me know. Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Blue Sky Threads, whatever. You can even DM me on the YouTube page if you want to. I want to know what I missed or if there's episodes that I need to be familiar with. So the first one is from the show Family Ties. We have talked about this one before because I think it's such a powerhouse. It was season 4, episode 10 of it aired December 12th, 1985, called How Do You Sleep? And it was sort of the 22-minute, I'm not sure how long sitcoms were back in 1985, 22, 25 minutes, where Michael Keaton, portrayed amazingly by Michael J. Fox, sort of devolves into insomnia. And he has an amazing dialogue with himself when he's in his bedroom. And it's comedic and his family's trying to help, but at the same time, putting more pressure on him to sleep. And at some point, Skippy comes over and spends the night with him. I mean, it's just this amazing acting portrayal of the frustration. And it really works because when we think about the three P's, five P's, nine P's of insomnia, P number one is predisposition. And for a certain aged individual, or maybe somebody who's familiar with television, I could say you've got that Alex P. Keaton vibe, right? Remember, there was another episode where the stage was kind of black, like there'd be like a window hanging, and he was talking about when he was in the kindergarten class, how the teacher would always call on him. And he says, like, who puts pressure on a 7-year-old like that? The teacher would say, okay, I'm going to ask Alex class because he always knows the answer. It was like, why did Christopher Columbus sail to America? And he talks about as a kindergartner knowing that he was looking for trade routes and it was all a big mistake that when he found the America, he thought he had found traveled to the Indies, whatever. So I always thought that his portrayal and his ability to outwardly speak what was going on in his very type A, detail-oriented, perfectionist mind was incredible. It's really a wonderful episode that everybody should see at some point. Number 2, X-Files, season 4, episode 2. It looks like season 4 is when the television show starts to explore themes of sleep, right? So this was season 4, episode 2, and the name of the title of the episode was Sleepless. And if you're not familiar with the X-Files, this was David Duchovny, Gillian Anderson, this amazing, groundbreaking show where they're investigating paranormal things via the FBI. And this, if you're a big fan of the X-Files, this reminds me of medical school. This was all going on. I was in medical school from 95 to 99, and I remember this was a big show during that time. This was the episode where Agent Krychek and an X were first introduced, and they were kind of recurring episodes in the show. And the whole theme of the episode was that there was a secret military operation where they were lobotomizing soldiers so that they no longer needed to sleep. So they became even more of a lethal fighting weapon. And I believe the episode kind of showed the downstream effects of what they did to these soldiers. And very thought-provoking, very interesting, and not too far off from the truth in some ways, in the sense that there are military programs to use medications like modafinil or armodafinil, which we've talked about for hypersomnia, to help soldiers stay awake later, fight off the effects of fatigue and sleepiness. If you're a pilot flying and doing something and coming back, like sleepiness and fatigue is probably not the greatest thing to be dealing with. So I thought that was a really great episode and one you should check out. Just a series. If you're looking for I'm always looking for a good series that I kind of missed. I just finished The Sopranos. A lot of interesting sleep themes in that. There's a bonus for you where Tony Soprano will often dream. as the season goes on, he's creating a lot of angst and instability in his mind about what he does and how he reconciles different parts of his life. And a lot of these things manifest themselves in dreams during the show, which are really creative. The next one, courtesy of Camille, who got this whole thing rolling, Star Trek: The Next Generation, and the episode was called Night Terrors. And in this episode, the Enterprise crew is trapped in REM deprivation. They're all hallucinating wildly, and apparently, some alien force was using this as a way to kind of control them. REM sleep is really important for memory consolidation and emotional regulation. And I actually I wasn't a big Star Trek fan. I like Star Trek. I never really watched it though, so I don't know a lot about it. I've always had this hankering to watch all of the Star Trek movies with William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and all those guys. I always start them. Like I remember starting one, and William Shatner was mountain climbing, and it was just so badly done. I couldn't deal with it. It just didn't make any sense to me. Plus, I was like, I'm watching a show about outer space. Why are we starting off on the side of like Yosemite, Half Dome? I didn't really understand that. I've always been interested in Wrath of Khan. Everybody likes that one, but I never wanted to watch Wrath of Khan out of order, so I've never seen it. But anyway, so I need to get on that. So, yep, Star Trek Next Generation, Night Terrors, check it out. Next one, MASH. I am a huge fan of MASH, huge fan of the Thomas Hooker book, huge fan of the Richard Altman movie. I always liked uh, Donald Sutherland's portrayal of Hawkeye in that. I always thought was so creative, the way he would whistle. But anyway, this MASH episode was Dr. Pierce and Mr. Hyde. And this was an episode where Hawkeye, portrayed by Alan Alda, is getting hammered in terms of trauma and surgery and all the helicopters and soldiers coming in. And he goes, has this really long stint of operating. And then finally it ends. He is relieved and he goes back to the swamp to sleep and he can't. And I remember that from medical school, I had an episode where I was there all day for medical school, went to the Emory Wesley Woods Sleep Center to run studies at night for a research project and work with Don Blywise out there at Wesley Woods and did sleep studies. So I was like the tech. So I would run the studies and study, but I had to be awake. You couldn't sleep during a sleep study. In fact, that's where I would always get these calls in the middle of the night from Bill Dement, which was fascinating. Is Don there? I'm like, oh no, Dr. Dement, he's not. Can I take a message? Oh no, just tell him to call me. I had a great idea, or something like that. It was always just, and I'm like, what time is it where you're at? It was always really late, but those were my interactions with Bill Dement. Like I knew who I was talking to. Bill Dement had no clue who he was talking to, some rando guy at the sleep center taking notes for Don Blywise, taking messages, phone messages for Don Blywise. But anyway, so I would finish up there. So I've gone like, a long time without sleep, all day at school, and then all night running the sleep lab. I would come home like Saturday morning. I remember one time getting into bed. I can picture the sheets. I can picture the whole scene right there at the corner of Claremont and Decatur in Atlanta, Georgia. And I couldn't fall asleep. And I remember thinking, what in the world? How can I not fall asleep after this situation? And I remember being equally intrigued and frustrating by the whole situation. And that's what's going on here in this MASH episode. And it's amazing. And Alan Alda said this was one of the hardest shoots he ever did because he was also in real life going through real exhaustion during these long shoots. And when you watch that episode, brother, it's more than makeup. He looks destroyed. And I love the juxtaposition between the Family Ties episode and the way it's joking, it's funny. Alan Alda's portrayal is a bit darker, and I think it's really, really great. Next episode, Schitt's Creek. Another one of my favorites. Let me tell you something. If you've not watched Schitt's Creek, do yourself a favor and watch Schitt's Creek. It is one of the best ensemble shows I've ever seen. It's one of those shows where it's like The Office. The Office is great. Parks and Rec. I oscillate back and forth in terms of who is the best actor on this show. And I think I've made a case for the four primaries at some point or another. And in fact, I think in the last season of that show, all four actors won Emmys for their portrayals. And they're just so good. Eugene Levy, Catherine O'Hara, uh, David Levy, I think is the son, and Annie, ugh, can't think of the last name of the woman who played the daughter. Just phenomenal. But anyway, in this episode, David, the son, is getting ready to get married. His marriage is coming up, and he wets the bed. And it's just so well done. I mean, again, it's a comedy, but it really kind of shines this light on people wet the bed. Ask me, hey Chris, you're a sleep guy. You treat patients. Ever see enuresis in adults? Yes, a lot. People wet the, and I'm only seeing people who have gotten to the point where they're saying, ugh, I got to talk to somebody about this. The one-offs, nobody's going to the doctor because they wet the bed once. Do you know what I mean? Like by the time they get to me, it's happening. So it's such a good episode. I love anything that shines a light on CPAPs, which are kind of embarrassing for some people. Nobody really wants to wear a CPAP. So I love a show where a character's got a CPAP. I love this show where David, the very stylish owner of the Rose Apothecary, wets the bed. So good. And the greatest is his mother, Moira, portrayed by Catherine O'Hara. Has a line that says, David's nighttime enuresis only comes around when he's juiced up with excited anticipation about something. Christmas, birthdays, the Ides of March. Now it's your impending nuptials that have opened up the floodgates. I always thought that was really great. Next episode, season 8, episode 18 of Seinfeld, 1997, classic The Nap. Somebody just sent me a figurine of George Costanza underneath the desk sleeping. So he's basically working for the Yankees. He doesn't have a particularly defined job, so he's often just sitting there at his desk doing nothing, which is the key to a lot of the episodes with George. Remember the Pinsky file? He just has this accordion folder that he organizes papers in, but does nothing meaningful with them. And he's taking power naps under his desk, and it's so good. So if you, I mean, everybody I'm sure has seen it, but for some reason you missed episode 18, season 8 of Seinfeld, The Nap. You got to check it out, especially if you're a Yankees fan. In fact, I'm wondering if somebody in the Yankees organization currently, based upon how they got started this season, is now pulling a Costanza and napping under the desk and may be unaware of the slide that they're currently in. So they may want to do a little internal investigation. 30 Rock Sandwich Day. Liz Lemon is caught sleep eating, which is a nod to nocturnal eating syndrome, a real disorder we've talked about on the podcast. I like that. Big fan of that show. Tina Fey, a UVA grad, so wahoo wah, Tina Fey. The Simpsons, How the Test Was Won. Another great episode where I'm not a huge Simpson watcher, but every sleep person in the world has seen this episode that basically shows Homer Simpson undergoing a sleep study and his brain shows no activity even when he's awake. It's so good. And they get so much of the sleep study right that I mean, when that came out, it was just so big within the sleep community. Um, anyway, now is the term Homeric flatlining. You know, it just kind of created its own sort of ecosystem now. And the next one I'm going to pull out is one of my favorite shows, Parks and Rec, where Ron Swanson naps with his eyes open. And the great quotation from that episode was, Dolphins do this for real. Unihemispheric sleep. Ron Swanson, just gifted. So good. And again, kernels of truth there within sleep. And The final episode I'll pull out there just because it's such another good show was The Office, and this was the episode, season three, episode five, called Initiation, where Dwight claims he has trained himself to go weeks without sleep, and then he throws in there that he does this every January. Oh, it's so good. Clearly a lie, and that whole episode is just sort of a window of kind of, toxic productivity myths. And it's a big thing within sleep. So what does it all mean? Sleep isn't just biologically necessary. It's comedy gold and dramatic gold. Whether you're using it for, laughs or the basis of a science fiction plot, sleep, or even the lyrics of a song. I mean, sleep is just a timeless subject, and it's so much fun to talk about. Maybe not the most accurate portrayals in all situations, but I think they do speak to a cultural understanding, a cultural identity that sleep has that we can learn a lot about as providers and people who sleep, in terms of what do others think about sleep and how can we redefine this messaging on these bigger scales to make things even more resonant and educational. And that's why we do what we do here every week on Sleep Unplugged. So if you like this episode, let me know if you have some ideas of things that we missed. I'd love to talk about them in future episodes of the show. Dr. Chris Winter, Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter, Twitter, Blue Skies Threads. You can follow us on the YouTube page. We'll put some television songs on the Spotify music playlist. And until next week, sleep well.